it's not the first time I come to an EARMA conference, but admittedly, I never made it at such a short notice because I learned about it yesterday at 3 o'clock. And frankly speaking, I come to Vienna quite frequently because my daughter is doing her studies here. If you don't tell it, she's at the other university in Vienna. But again, I never came to Vienna for such a short stay because my plane back leaves at 12:40. So that's definitely the wrong approach, and you can be lucky to stay in this wonderful city a bit longer and enjoy it. Okay, that's the right one. Obviously, I'm not Jacques Mette. He is, so to speak, the chief negotiator for the Horizon 2020, and in this sense, he would have been the ideal speaker for your event. But the disadvantage of inviting the main negotiator is that as long as the negotiations are going on, you run the risk that he has urgent negotiations to do, and that is what happened exactly this morning, and that's why I was asked to step in. What I would like to do this morning is to guide you a little bit through the political context of Horizon 2020, update you on some of the key features of Horizon 2020, and yes, in a sense, come back a little bit to the events of last week and tell you a little bit on how things are evolving. I will use, obviously, the slides which have been prepared for Jacques, but here and there I might deviate a little bit because there is always an individual note to these general presentations. The overall environment for Horizon 2020, I don't think I need to explain to this audience this in full detail, but I think it is very important that we all realize that the good old times where DG Research in Brussels was, so to speak, an island, isolated from the rest of the Commission activities, isolated from the major political debates, these times are over. Fortunately, I would say, the research is now an integral part of the overall political agenda, and it is seen as an element, especially in the current context, to help Europe to get out of the crisis, to keep some momentum, and not to have a situation where the economic crisis stalls all our activities. As you know, there is an overall political framework within the European context, the so-called European 2020 strategy, and knowledge, the knowledge economy, is at the very heart of this strategy, and I think it's very important to see that research and innovation has been placed in a very prominent position. And what I think is very important to recognize, this is not just on paper, it also materialized when we look at the recent decisions on distributing the money and providing the necessary support for investments in these fields. The most prominent action in this context is this flagship Innovation Union, the initiative launched by our commissioner 2.5 years ago. It is much too early to say mission accomplished, and by the way, the European Union has not an aircraft carrier where we could do a show as George Bush did, but what we will do, much more modest, is we will publish a communication by the end of the year where we see where we stand on the achievements on the Innovation Union. Yes, there are some. There is progress on the unitary patent. There are the European innovation partnerships which go ahead. There is still, as I said, a very strong support both from the member states and the European Parliament for the innovation agenda and for Horizon 2020. And this idea of smart fiscal consolidation is gaining ground. Smart fiscal consolidation, basically meaning, yes, it's time to reflect on the spending levels at member state level, but if one has to cut, it might not be exactly in these areas which are the most promising for the future. So to have, let's say, stable or maybe even increasing spending on research in order to keep all the chances for future competitiveness. But of course, such an introduction, such a context would be incomplete if it was all in rosy pictures, because as we all know, we have to face a lot of challenges, or if you allow me more down-to-earth language, yes, we have problems. First of all, if we look at the overall investment in R&D, figures are not great, and in particular the public R&D investments have decreased. We also see that the number of innovative firms is not developing in a positive sense, and we also see that the divide on research and innovation persists. The famous reunification of Europe is taking place at a very slow pace when we look at the situation in research and innovation. And yes, we also have, when we look at the situation with human resources, not just overall very high unemployment figures in a really dramatic dimension in some countries, but we also have mismatches in the skills supply, as we have at the same time a real shortage of adequate human resources in a number of fields. So it shows that the market is not functioning the way it should. Last slide on this general background is a look at the financial planning. You have followed, I'm sure, the political debate on this with the European Council in February, where the overall decision was taken by the heads of states. Obviously, the new player in the game is the European Parliament, and it now looks as if we are heading to a deal which basically says, yes, the overall figures remain stable, but the Parliament gains some extra rights in terms of a potential reattribution of funds over the duration of this financial planning. The most important news for us who are interested in launching Horizon 2020, I include all of you in this, is of course that hopefully we get an agreement and adoption of this financial framework as soon as possible, because without this there is no chance to make any progress on Horizon 2020. The overall financial framework is the precondition, and we are very happy that it now looks, I mean, the deal was done at the top level, so it now hopefully will follow in a more practical terms in the week to come. Now let me turn to Horizon 2020, and don't worry, I will not start now the Commission standard presentation on the different parts of Horizon 2020, etc., etc., etc. I assume you know all this. What I would like to do is to be a bit more selective, and I say this explicitly because yes, there might be questions, why didn't you mention this, why didn't you mention that? My colleagues have done an analysis, and in total there are now 137 activity lines of Horizon 2020. And I got 30 minutes to talk, so I will not talk about all these, but focus on a number of important tickets. Well, the key features are well known, and I will elaborate a little bit on these, but I think what is the main message of this slide is a sentence in the middle, which says Horizon 2020 is no more business as usual. Now, I know that I have a hard stand on this argument because I'm in the business since 20 years essentially, and with every new framework program we were touring Europe and saying this is a break with the past, this is something completely new, forget everything you know until now, now it's different, etc., etc. And yes, I'm doing it again today here in Vienna, and you might say, okay, fine, great. And yet, I think it would be a mistake if you simply put it here under the Commission Rhetorics folder. There is real substantial change in this step from FP7 to Horizon 2020. And to be honest, if I observe a little bit what's going on in terms of preparation in the member states I've been to, I'm a bit worried that there is too much conservatism, that too many people think, yeah, it's basically the same game, yes, we have our old proposals in the fridge, and yes, we can take them out of the fridge and resubmit them, etc., etc. And I think their colleagues might be on the wrong track. There are important changes and they need to be taken into account, otherwise it will be a failure both individually and of course collectively. Now let me turn to this first key feature of integration. And to be perfectly honest, I think the easier part of this integration is for the Commission to prepare a document where we glue together several dimensions of innovation and research policy, where we say, okay, we integrate the CIP program, yes, we put also the EIT in the overall context. That, okay, colleagues might not agree, that is relatively easy to do. What is more difficult is then, and that is your job in the years to come, is to make this integration happen in the projects. Because this means new challenges, new requirements, a new way of organizing projects, and it also means new challenges, of course, for project management and project administration. So, the integration job is done at the program level, we have a nice package, but the real test, the famous pudding, still has to come. With regard to innovation, this is, of course, the most obvious change. It starts with the title. It's the first framework program for research and innovation. And it is also, so to speak, the unknown dimension. In the sense that if you talk to potential applicants, they know very well the mechanisms of the framework program, the research, they know the evaluation criteria, they know who are the right partners for a research project. And now we have this strange animal called innovation. And how do you evaluate this, and how do you integrate this, and who are the right partners, etc., etc. So that is the element which, in my view, requires the most profound rethinking of the current strategies. And I know that some people do this very actively, but I also realize that a number of people so far are at a, let's say, very initial phase of these reflections. Let me also say that innovation, of course, is a buzzword with many different connotations. And we understand innovation, let's say, in a very wide sense. It's not only the classical commercial innovation that means a new product or a new market. It also has this dimension of innovation in services and social innovation. So innovation, for instance, also in the way of designing policies, innovation in the way to bring public goods to the citizens and so on. So it is not only a market-driven innovation, but a much wider concept. The next key element in Horizon 2020 is this issue of addressing societal challenges. That is, of course, not new. I mean, it would be rather strange if after 30 years of framework programs, Manfred Horvath will give a talk on the history of these activities tomorrow. If after 30 years we say, and now we look at societal challenges, I mean, that would be a bit strange. Nevertheless, what we have done this time, for the first time, I think, is really to identify big tickets and to make it clear from the legal text, and it will be, I hope, even clearer from the work programs to come, that we invite truly multidisciplinary research in order to tackle these challenges. So we continue our efforts to go beyond, let's say, disciplinary structures in this main part of Horizon 2020. An additional dimension here, of course, is that we put more emphasis than ever on the problem solving. We include demonstration, prototyping activities. We clearly send a message that we need a broader range of participants in the projects, including industry, including small and medium enterprises, including all kinds of people and organizations who can help bring the new knowledge into shape for any kind of possible application. I mean, this is, in my view, something that needs a very thorough preparation when we talk about Horizon 2020. There will be a stronger emphasis on stakeholder involvement. Now, if you go on Google and you type stakeholder, you find millions. I mean, this is not the problem. The problem is to find the right stakeholders to make sure that stakeholder involvement generates an added value for the project. We also say we want the projects to go further than to have a final report which lists the issues and problems at stake and so on. We want the research to go up to the point where there is, so to speak, something which is ready to use. And that, of course, changes the design of the project, and it also requires another composition, maybe, of the project partnership. I worked for a long while in the social science program, and many of the projects I was responsible for started their project description in saying the aim of the project is to gain a better understanding of, and then came whatever came. Yes, a better understanding of is, of course, an ambition for anyone who is in the field of research and science, but clearly in Horizon 2020 the effort shouldn't stop there. The better understanding, okay, but what to do with the better understanding, this is a clear question to the applicants. Now, meeting the needs of industry. In FP7 right now, industry or the private sector represents, roughly speaking, 25% of the participants and also 25% of the budget. Now one can have ideological discussions on what is the right number, whether this is too much or too little. But clearly, if you aim at a project that should increase the competitiveness of Europe in the global market, and if you launch a new program for research and innovation, I think boosting the participation of industry in the program is essential. And to a large extent, in my view, this means bringing back industry. Because the truth is, if you look at especially recent years, we have lost a lot of important companies who previously participated in the framework program but at a certain point gave up for many different reasons. Simplification, etc., might be one of the issues here. But I mean, we need these key players in order to make substantive progress on this front. We will have proposals for joint technology initiatives. If everything goes well, they will be presented formally on the 10th of July. With a big show with President Barroso having breakfast with a number of big heads from European industry. And we also have the plans for some contractual public-private partnerships, and you see here the topic, so this will be of a growing importance in the future. What is not on the slide, but what common sense, I think, requires to add to it, is one way of attracting industry to the framework program, and now I'm speaking as an economist, is of course to make it more attractive for them. And I mean, the conditions, the funding conditions for private companies in Horizon 2020 will be more favorable than they are right now. This is a very clear message as well. Now, one particular group of private participants in the framework program are the small and medium enterprises. They represent right now around 16% of the funding for the cooperation program of FP7. And in the future, the target will be that the spending on SMEs should be at least 20% of the spending on the societal challenges and the emerging technologies part of Horizon 2020. But I mean, how much money we spend on SMEs at the end of the day is not of any relevance. The relevant question is whether by integrating SMEs in Horizon 2020, we manage to strengthen the innovative firms and we are able to support SMEs which have the growth potential to grow out of the SME context. One of the interesting observations of evaluations which we have carried out in recent years, I'm sorry, I'm the head of the evaluation department, so I have to talk about this. One of the interesting features is that, yes, we have a lot of SMEs in our program, but many of these SMEs have already been SMEs 20 years ago. So, nothing wrong with these, but I mean, if the idea is growth and boosting, etc., maybe we need also another clientele on board in order to get the job done. That brings me now to the end of my talk with some remarks on the interinstitutional negotiations. And I might surprise you with the statement that we are at the end almost of a negotiation process which started in November 2011. And nobody counted the number of council working group meetings and council meetings and co-repairs and European Parliament meetings and so on. A really very, very heavy, lengthy, and allow me to say, tiring process. At the same time, I have to say, and in all honesty, this negotiation process went amazingly smoothly, it went really nicely, and it went very well. Because I think the fundamental question one has to ask is at the end, was there an agreement on the essential things, and was there a lot of discussion about technicalities and so on, or was it a complete disagreement on everything and then at the end, let's say, a very, very weak compromise? And the truth is that on the fundamentals of the Commission proposals, there was a very strong agreement both in the Council and in the Parliament, and we had very long and complicated and hard discussions on technical questions, but the fundamentals, the basic ideas, there is an amazingly high degree of agreement, which I think is a very encouraging signal. And I want to stress this because if you look at it just from the outset, you might say, okay, if these folks take almost 2 years to agree, okay, they must have really very different views. Now, at this point, I will deviate a little bit from the slides which have been prepared for Jack, because I would like to just say a few words on the main elements of the last-minute deal which was done last week and which is, so to speak, the political agreement which hopefully will be endorsed now both by the Parliament and by the Council. So, nothing is official. there is no ink yet on the documents, but I mean, there is a deal, and under normal circumstances this should carry through. We expect that the formal adoption of Horizon 2020 could take place in September or beginning of October at the latest. And that's also, in technical terms, the last slot in order to get all the subsequent legal procedures adopted so that we can start the program as planned on the 1st of January 2014 and have the first calls out maybe in a more or less official form shortly before Christmas. Main elements of the deal: funding rates. There will be a unique system for the reimbursement of costs, with the 100% direct cost for all participants, plus a 25% flat rate to cover indirect costs. Again, for all participants. The only exception is that for activities which I think are now called innovation projects, to avoid the term close to market, there the rate will be 70% and 25%. There will be also the possibility for so-called eligibility of additional remuneration. This is something that exists already in FP7 under the maybe somewhat unfortunate name of bonus. I mean, if bonus payments are not very popular in the political debate right now, but here we talk about additional remuneration up to 8,000 euros per year, but only for non-profit organizations, so not for the private sector. Something which will be very important for your work in particular, and also, if I may say, for our work, is that the maximum time to grant is fixed at 8 months. Oof. Right now, it depends on how you calculate, but we are, let's say, well above a year. And cutting from that to 8 months is very difficult to achieve if you keep the system as it is. Just, I'm saying trivial things, but it may be worth saying them. So please expect that this whole system of what happens between proposal evaluation and the signature of a grant is likely to change in a rather dramatic way, because otherwise it will not be possible to get the things done within 8 months. I have no mandate to make any official statements on what will change, but I give you 2 ideas which, let's say, are discussed in our cafeteria. So, no official value, but it gives an idea. The first one is that we might have to be very strict in the sense that we say, this is a proposal, you have to reply to it within a certain period of time, and if by then there is no positive end to the discussions, then next one, please. Yeah? So what we have now, that we have projects where the negotiations drag on for 2 years, 2.5 years, will be simply no longer possible, because it ruins, obviously, every benchmark figure for the time to grant. Another consequence might be, and here I'm speaking as someone who was with project proposal evaluations for a long while, that you always have proposals which the evaluators fall in love with, despite the fact that the proposal has very serious weaknesses. And then they start saying, we love it, we want to rescue it, but it means that you have to cut out this work package and you have to bring in another partner and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. okay, these kind of proposals will have a very hard time in the future, maybe, because simply there will be no time to get all these complicated changes implemented. We might get to a system where we will say to the evaluators, you have to look at the proposals which are in front of you. Do you like it? Do you not like it? That's it. As I said, these are just two ideas. I mean, we don't have a ready-made recipe yet, but to give you an idea what kind of impact this time to grant will have, of course for us, but I think also for those on the management side in the projects. For the budget, just to tell you, the magic figure which is now going around in Brussels is 68.7. These are billion euros, and these refer to the budget for Horizon 2020 without Euratom and in constant prices of 2011. I raise this figure, 68.7 billions, because the deal on the distribution of funds between different parts of the program is done on a percentage base, and the 100% are exactly these 68.7 billion. So just to allow you to do your own calculations in case. Last thing I want to mention, and that is as in every deal, in every compromise, it's only a good deal if everybody at the end of the day is in tears. That is one where, okay, we were not in tears, but almost. That is the idea of the so-called fast track to innovation pilot scheme, an idea which was brought in by the Parliament. It's very pilot in the sense that no one, I think, right now has a very precise idea how it should work, but the main conditions are maximum 5 partners, maximum 3 million euros, constantly open, fixed deadlines 3 or 4 times a year, and everything should go very fast, à la limite, even without a formal commission decision. We'll see how this materializes, but it's another attempt to speed up the whole implementation of the project. Now, I finish here with some very general conclusions. Yes, we hope that Horizon 2020 can do the job to stimulate our knowledge economy in order to bring us more quickly and more profoundly out of the crisis. We also hope it is a stimulus to the research community in all parts of Europe that their work is valorized and that there is a trust from politicians and from the taxpayers that investing so much money in research and innovation at the end of the day will pay off. And yes, we hope that, I hope at least that when in a couple of years my successors will carry out an evaluation of Horizon 2020, they will see that a lot of the promises we are talking about today will be realized. Thank you very much for your attention.